My name is Eleanor Mayhew, Ellie to most, and I was a nurse for 32 years at Mercy Hollow Infirmary, a small hospital tucked into the Appalachian foothills. You wouldn't have heard of it unless you lived nearby, and even then, it wasn't the kind of place anyone wanted to end up in. It was old, underfunded, and always a little too cold, even in the summer, but it was home. For a long time, it was the only place I felt like I mattered. We saw everything in that hospital: logging accidents, snake bites, gunshot wounds on weekends after too much beer, babies born in parking lots. And sometimes, things I still don't understand, no matter how many times I turn them over in my mind. I've never been someone to exaggerate. I've lived a full life, lost a husband, raised 2 boys, and worked more double shifts than I can count. But since I retired, there are 4 nights that keep coming back to me. 4 shifts I can't seem to let go of no matter how much time passes. The first one happened in October of 1995. I was 53, had been head nurse for almost a decade, and thought I'd seen it all by then. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It started like most night shifts did: quiet, tired, and too much coffee. I was covering for a younger nurse who had come down with something. It was just me, a sleepy doctor on call, and a skeleton crew of staff. Around 2:30 in the morning, I got a call from the front desk. They told me an ambulance had just pulled in with an unidentified male they picked up wandering barefoot along Route 9, near the cemetery out by Hollow Pine. "He's not injured," the EMT said. "Just off. Quiet. Won't speak. No ID, no phone, no wallet." We didn't have a psych unit. Closest one was 45 minutes away, so until we could figure out what to do with him, he was ours. When they wheeled him in, I swear to you, everything in me just stopped. The man was in his early 40s, maybe older. Thin, dirt-caked skin, eyes wide open, staring right at me. He didn't blink once the whole time they were talking. I remember thinking how dry his eyes must have been. I'd never seen someone stare like that. Not like a person, like an animal that already knows what's going to happen next. I walked up to him with my usual bedside smile. "Hi there, my name's Ellie. We're just going to get you settled and checked out, all right?" And then, in this low, calm voice, he said, "Eleanor Mayhew." I stopped in my tracks. He didn't say it like he was reading a name tag. He didn't look confused. He said it like he'd known me for years. I tried to stay professional. "Yes, that's right. Do you know me?" He didn't answer, just stared at me, still as stone. I thought maybe one of the paramedics had said my name outside the doors or something. That's how I explained it to myself at the time. I told the orderly to bring him to room 9, one of the private ones at the end of the hallway, and I followed behind. The air in that hallway felt colder than usual. You could always count on Mercy Hollow to be drafty, but that night the chill felt like it had a weight to it. Once we had him settled on the bed, I tried again. "Do you know your name? Can you tell me where you came from?" He stayed quiet, eyes never leaving mine. I reached for the vitals monitor to get his blood pressure, but as I did, he finally spoke again. "You cried for a week when you buried her, under the oak tree. You wore your Sunday shoes, even though it was muddy." I froze. I don't know how long I stood there, but I felt every hair on my arm stand up. He was talking about Daisy, my childhood rabbit. I buried her when I was 7, back behind my grandma's house under the big oak tree. I hadn't told anyone about that in over 30 years, not even my husband. My mouth went dry. I asked him, "How do you know that?" Still no answer. Then he said something else, something worse. "You didn't tell Russell. Not then, not ever. You cleaned the blood yourself, cried over the sink." I could barely breathe. He was talking about something I had only ever thought about in the dark, something I had buried deep and far away. I'd had a miscarriage at home before we were married. I didn't even go to the hospital. I was young, scared, and ashamed. I never told a soul. I stepped back, suddenly needing space. "I'm going to get the doctor," I said, but my voice came out shaky. I walked out into the hallway and took a deep breath. My hands were trembling. I tried to tell myself this was a coincidence, a cruel trick of memory, or maybe I'd said something out loud without realizing. Maybe he was a drifter who overheard things or got into our records somehow. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't guessing. He knew. When I came back just a few minutes later, the bed was empty. The patient was gone. I rushed to the hallway, called for security, searched every room he could have wandered into. But there was nothing. Nobody saw him leave. The front doors hadn't opened. It was like he vanished, except for one thing. His bed rail. It had my full name carved into it. Eleanor Mayhew. Deep, jagged letters, like it had been scratched in with fingernails. There were even little flakes of nail and blood around the edges. We filed a missing patient report. The cameras weren't working that night because of a storm that knocked out part of the power grid. We were on generator backup, which wasn't uncommon. Nobody ever found him. I tried to let it go, told myself it was just one of those strange, unexplainable nights in a long career full of them. Until a week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a scrap of lined paper, folded once. No greeting, no signature. Just 7 words written in shaky handwriting. "You die. October 23rd, 11:06 p.m. At first I laughed, a short, nervous kind of laugh, but something in my chest felt tight. I threw the letter out, burned it in the kitchen sink, told myself it was just a prank or maybe a leftover bit of crazy from a sleep-deprived shift. But I didn't sleep much after that, and when the night of October 23rd came around, I found myself sitting in the hospital break room, alone, watching the clock like my life depended on it. The break room was silent except for the steady hum of the vending machine and the ticking of the old wall clock above the microwave. I was sitting alone on the vinyl couch with a styrofoam cup of coffee in my hands, gone cold long ago. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright, but I didn't dare turn them off. I kept glancing up at the clock every few seconds, my eyes locked on the minute hand like it might suddenly lurch forward. October 23rd, 11:02 p.m. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I felt ridiculous sitting there, jumping at the sound of ice shifting in the freezer behind me. I kept trying to tell myself it was a coincidence. That disappearance, the letter, the things he said, they were just fragments of a long, exhausting career finally getting to me. But deep down, I knew better. At 11:04, the light above the sink started to flicker. I stared at it for a long second, then another. It buzzed softly, sputtered out, and came back on again with a low hum. The same hum I'd heard 1,000 times before, and never once thought twice about. But now it sounded wrong, too loud, too mechanical, like it was straining. 11:05. I stood up. My legs felt heavy and unsteady, like I'd been sitting for hours, not just 20 minutes. I walked over to the doorway and peeked out into the hallway. It was empty, but I could swear the air had gotten colder, just like it did that night. A subtle shift in pressure, like something had stepped into the room with me and I just hadn't seen it yet. I was sweating under my scrubs, but my skin felt cold. My chest was tight. I looked back at the clock. 11:06. Nothing happened. I let out a shaky laugh, a kind of relief-laced exhale, like I'd been holding my breath for too long. I leaned against the wall, heart thudding in my ears, and shook my head. "Get a grip, Ellie," I whispered to myself. "You're too old for this." But then I felt it, a pressure in my chest, sharp and sudden, like someone had reached inside and clenched a fist around my heart. I gasped and stumbled back against the counter, my vision blurred, my knees buckled. I sank to the floor, one hand clutching my chest, the other scrambling for the wall behind me. It wasn't pain exactly, not like a heart attack. It was more like a shutdown. My body felt like it was giving up, like it had decided it was time to go whether I was ready or not. I remember the clock face, how the second hand stuttered for just a moment at 11:06, and then everything went black. I woke up an hour later in the same spot on the floor. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking, but I was alive. The lights were back to normal. The coffee in my cup had gone completely cold, and when I checked my watch, it read 12:09 a.m. The next morning I told no one. I wanted to forget the whole thing. I really did, but part of me couldn't stop thinking about that minute, that exact moment. Something had happened, and whether it was something in my head or something outside it, I knew it had marked me. That man, whoever, whatever he was, had left something behind. After that night, things went back to normal for a little while, or at least they pretended to, but I never quite felt like myself again. My sleep was never deep. I kept hearing faint whispers in the hospital halls when no one else was around, and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. Nothing definite, just shadows that seemed too quick, too intentional. Then, about 3 months later, I started having trouble with my heartbeat. Nothing serious at first, just some palpitations, a flutter here and there. I chalked it up to stress, got it checked out. Everything came back normal. But still, something was wrong. I could feel it, like my body was misfiring, but the machines didn't know how to detect it. That was the first time I started to suspect that maybe what happened with John Doe wasn't just a one-time thing. Maybe it wasn't just some isolated brush with the unexplained. Maybe it was the beginning of something. And unfortunately, I was right. The second experience I'll never forget came a year later, during another late-night shift. This one, on a muggy summer night in August. It was the kind of sticky, airless heat that makes everything feel just a little bit heavier. We had 3 patients in overnight, 2 post-surgery, 1 observation. Pretty quiet. I was filling out discharge paperwork at the front station when the radio buzzed in. "We've got a man coming in from a logging accident out near Black Ridge." Logging accidents weren't rare around Mercy Hollow. The forest out there had been worked for generations. Sometimes trees fell the wrong way. Sometimes chainsaws kicked back. But the tone in the EMT's voice wasn't routine. "We lost one at the scene," she said. "The other's barely hanging on." About 20 minutes later, they wheeled in a man named Hank. He was in bad shape. Cuts across his chest and arms, skin pale, lips blue-tinged. But he was conscious, eyes wide open, just like the last one, staring. This time, not at me, just straight ahead, as if he was watching something behind the wall. We got him into trauma and started working. I began to prep him for a blood draw. The wounds didn't look fresh anymore, more like old burns, dark and dry at the edges. That was the first weird thing. The second came when I pulled the vial from his arm. It wasn't red. It was black, not just dark blood, not clotted, pure black, like oil, thick, slow-moving, inky black. I blinked, thinking maybe the lighting was playing tricks on me. I held the vial up to the overhead light. Still black. I called in another nurse, then doctor, Givens, who took one look and told me to run it down to the lab immediately. The lab tech thought I was playing some kind of prank. "This from a human?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I watched it come out of his arm myself," I said. He ran the tests, but nothing came back. It wasn't blood, or at least it wasn't anything our equipment recognized. Back in the trauma room, Hank was muttering under his breath. At first it sounded like gibberish. Low, slurred nonsense. But the longer we listened, the more it started to sound deliberate, like a language we didn't know. like chanting, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck rise even if you can't say why. We tried to sedate him, but every time we brought a needle near his arm, his veins would shift, pulling away under the skin. You could actually see them wriggle away from the point, like they were alive. I've never seen anything like it. None of us had. I was checking the lines again when I looked over at the glass cabinet across from the bed. Just a glance. Nothing unusual, except my reflection wasn't doing what I was doing. I froze. I lifted my hand. The reflection didn't move. I stepped back. It stayed where it was, looking not at me, but at Hank. It was smiling. I blinked hard, trying to shake the image. The reflection, my reflection, should have been mirroring me, but it wasn't. It was frozen there, its head slightly tilted, mouth curled into a faint, knowing smile. Its eyes weren't watching me at all. They were locked on Hank with this awful familiarity, like it recognized him, like it had been waiting for him. And then, in a split second, the reflection caught up, mirroring me exactly again, like nothing had happened. I took a step back, heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. What was I going to tell them? That the mirror had glitched? Dr. Givens didn't notice. He was too busy trying to stabilize Hank's oxygen levels. I forced myself to stay focused, kept busy. But I couldn't stop glancing at the cabinet glass, waiting for the reflection to slip again. It didn't. But Hank kept whispering. The language never made sense. We tried recording it, ran the audio through a speech software the hospital used for translation sometimes, but it came up with nothing. Not Latin, not German, not any modern dialect. One of the nurses, Mel, swore she heard her name once, clear as day, buried in the gibberish. That was enough to make her ask for a transfer the next day. She never came back. I wish that was where it ended. But the next morning, when the day shift came to take over, Hank was gone. The bed was empty. His chart was gone. No discharge paperwork, no ambulance transfer. Security claimed no one left the building with a patient that night. Just like John Doe a year earlier, he had vanished without a trace. I was starting to notice a pattern, and I wasn't the only one. Dr. Givens, who'd been calm through the whole thing, looked shaken for the first time. I found him in the stairwell 2 days later, sitting with his head in his hands. Said he kept dreaming about blood turning to ink. Said his nose had started bleeding every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., the time Hank had vanished. A week later, he quit. Then, 3 months after Hank disappeared, I noticed something else. I was doing my routine blood pressure check one evening, using the old cuff in the back exam room. When I looked at the gauge, the dial spun wildly for a few seconds, then stopped. The number didn't make sense. I reset it and tried again. Same thing. So I tried the digital one. It beeped and flashed, then displayed a red error screen. I assumed the battery was dying until I noticed something strange. The vein in my arm, the one I always used for draws, was darker, not bruised, just darker than the others. At first I thought maybe I'd banged it without realizing, but it wasn't sore. When I pressed on it, I could swear it pulsed differently, slower, heavier. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? I think one of my veins is turning black. Besides, I already knew what they'd do. They'd write it off as stress, a trick of the eye. They'd run a few tests, find nothing, and send me back to work like always. So I kept my mouth shut. I started carrying a flashlight in my pocket at all times. Not because I was afraid of the dark exactly, but because I'd noticed something terrifying. In complete darkness, pitch black, I could feel something moving inside me, something slow, something heavy, something that wasn't there before. That was the second night I stopped sleeping altogether. I thought I was losing my mind. I told myself maybe it was burnout, maybe grief that I hadn't acknowledged. After all, I'd lost Russell the year before. My boys had both moved away. Maybe I was unraveling. Maybe that was all it was. But the hospital wouldn't let me leave. Every time I tried to file for early retirement, something came up. Paperwork lost, denied leave, requests under review. I began to feel like Mercy Hollow didn't want to let me go, like I was somehow necessary, held in place. Still, I kept coming back. I didn't have much else. The hospital was my life, and as awful as it sounds, part of me was waiting for the third one. Like I knew another was coming, like I could feel it inching closer, night by night. And it came in the form of an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable. She came into the ER on a suffocatingly hot July night, 93 degrees and not a single breath of wind. I was halfway through a shift that had already seen 3 heat stroke cases and a kid who thought it'd be fun to shoot bottle rockets at a beehive. I was running on coffee and ibuprofen when the triage nurse waved me down and said, "Room 4's all yours." I grabbed the clipboard and walked in expecting another dehydration case. What I saw stopped me cold. Mrs. Gable was sitting perfectly upright in the hospital bed, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her skin, pale and papery, was covered in a thin layer of frost. I don't mean she was cold to the touch, I mean she had actual frost clinging to her hair and eyelashes. In the middle of a summer heat wave. I felt the temperature drop the moment I stepped into the room. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I'm Ellie. I'll be taking care of you tonight." She didn't look up, just whispered. The moon touched me. "Excuse me?" Her eyes flicked up to mine. They were sharp, clear, too clear. "I didn't want it to," she said softly, "but I looked too long, and now it won't stop." "Stop what?" I asked, pulling my stethoscope from around my neck. She didn't answer. I stepped forward and pressed the cold metal disc against her chest, and for a moment, I thought the stethoscope was broken because I heard 2 pulses, one steady beat and another layered underneath, mirroring the first perfectly. And then I realized they weren't her pulses. They were mine, identical. Every rhythm, every skip, every thud, exactly the same as my own heartbeat, like something was syncing us together. I jerked the stethoscope away. Mrs. Gable reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Her fingers were like ice. Her nails were chipped and yellowed, but she held me with the grip of someone much, much younger. "You hear it too, don't you?" she asked. "The knocking." I didn't know what she meant, not then, but that night when I was alone in the med supply closet, I heard it for the first time. Slow, even, deliberate. It came from inside the wall, and it matched my heartbeat. At first, I thought it had to be pipes. Old hospitals like Mercy Hollow made noise. The place breathed like a living thing. Rattling ducts, clanking heaters, the occasional creak from settling floorboards. But this knocking wasn't mechanical. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, slow, 3 beats at a time, spaced exactly like my pulse. Pause. I stood there in the med supply room, holding a clipboard I didn't remember picking up, staring at the wall like it might open its mouth and speak. I pressed my ear against the plaster, heart hammering, and the knocking stopped. But I could still feel it, in my wrists, in my throat, like the sound had moved into me. When I pulled back, the wall was cold. I didn't say anything to anyone that night. Who would believe it? Besides, I had patients, orders to fill, pills to count. The next time I heard it, I was home. It was 4 nights later. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I noticed the mirror shaking slightly. Not like a tremor, like it was responding to something. A vibration, maybe. Then I heard it again. Right behind the mirror. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth. I turned off the faucet, listened. My heart thudded once, and then, so did the knocking. It matched me. Exactly. I leaned forward, staring into the mirror. My reflection looked exhausted, sallow skin, dark bags under my eyes, collarbones sharper than I remembered. I hadn't been sleeping much, hadn't had the appetite to eat. I looked like someone who'd been afraid for too long. And then my reflection blinked. Out of sync. Not just a little out of time, wrong. My face twitched half a second before I moved, like it was leading me. I dropped the toothbrush in the sink and backed out of the bathroom, slept in the recliner with the hallway light on. Not that it helped. The knocking came again, once in the break room at work, once from inside the floor of the operating theater when I was standing completely alone, and once from inside my car while I was driving home through the fogged-up back roads of Hollow Pine. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to be taken off duty. I didn't want to be sent home. And more than anything, I didn't want to be alone with it. With whatever it was that had synced itself to me. Mrs. Gable died 3 nights after that first knock. 2:13 a.m. to the minute. Her monitor flatlined in the middle of a prayer one of the nurses was mumbling over her. But her chart showed something that still gives me chills when I think about it. She had no pulse for the entire hour before she died. No vitals, no blood pressure, nothing. The monitors were working just fine. We checked, triple checked, but somehow she had sat upright in bed, spoken, and looked at people without any signs of life registering on the machines, like her body had already been replaced, or hijacked, or emptied out and filled with something else. And the very moment she died, that exact second, the knocking changed. It no longer matched my heart. It matched my breath. It would start and stop with my inhales and exhales, and not just in one place anymore. Sometimes it came from the wall, sometimes from the floor, once from the ceiling above my bed. I started sleeping with the television on, always with something loud. Nature documentaries, cooking shows, anything to drown out the silence that invited the knocks. But silence always found its way back in. Eventually, I begged my doctor to run another EKG. He said my arrhythmia wasn't dangerous yet, but it was worth keeping an eye on. I lied to his face and told him I was having trouble breathing at night, asked about options. That's how I ended up with the pacemaker. The day I got it implanted, I slept through the night for the first time in months. No knocks, no strange dreams. Just sleep. Deep, dreamless sleep. I remember waking up with tears already on my face. I thought maybe I'd broken the connection. That maybe the thing, whatever it was, couldn't follow artificial rhythms. That maybe it needed something human to sync with. But I was wrong, because 2 weeks later, I heard it again. Only this time, it didn't match my heartbeat or my breath. It matched the tiny whir of my pacemaker perfectly, like it had learned something new. And that's when I realized it wasn't trying to follow me. It was trying to replace me. That's when I knew I had to leave Mercy Hollow. I filed for retirement the following week, told the board I'd reached my limit, said I wanted to travel, see my grandkids more. All lies. But they didn't question it. Maybe they'd seen enough in my face to understand. I was 3 weeks out from my last day when it happened again. The last shift. The final one. The hospital was nearly empty due to a blizzard that had locked down the surrounding roads. I'd volunteered to cover the night shift. Just me and a skeleton crew. No doctors on site. No techs. Just me, the front desk clerk, and a half-full thermos of coffee. Around midnight, I found a patient chart sitting on the desk in front of me. Chart number 13. But we didn't have a room 13. Mercy Hollow had skipped that number. Bad luck, they said. And we definitely didn't have a patient 13. I checked the admissions. I double-checked the census. Nothing. I picked up the folder. It had my name on it. Eleanor Mayhew. Date of birth. Correct. Blood type. Correct. Emergency contact. My sister. I opened the chart. Inside was a list of symptoms: headache behind the left eye, tingling in right pinky, restless sleep, elevated blood pressure, low appetite. All things I'd experienced over the past few weeks, but hadn't told a soul. I stared at it, not moving. Every hair on my body stood on end. I flipped the page. Laceration on right hand at 4:17 a.m. I looked at the wall clock, 4:10. I backed away from the desk, breath catching in my throat. I turned to leave, to lock myself in the janitor's closet until the hour passed. At 4:17, I heard the paper cutter fall off the counter in the admin office across the hall. It hit the floor with a loud clang. When I checked later, it had sliced the air right where I normally stood during night reports. The chart had known. I didn't go back to the desk until dawn. When I did, a new page had been added to the folder. It said, "Penicillin allergy discovered at 6:03 a.m." But I had never taken penicillin in my life. Still, I didn't touch anything in the pharmacy that morning. I didn't take any medication. I waited. And then, just before the morning shift arrived, I found one final page in the chart. Time of death, 6 a.m. Cause, massive internal bleeding. I stared at that last line. Time of death, 6 a.m. and waited for something to happen. My heart felt too loud in my chest. Every tick of the wall clock felt like a countdown. 5:54, 5:55, 5:56. I stood there, holding the chart in my hands like it might burn me. I looked around. The hallway outside the nurse's station was still and silent, lights buzzing faintly overhead. Snow was still coming down outside the narrow windows. The whole town was sleeping under a white blanket, and I was standing in an empty hospital waiting to die. 5:57. I should have run, should have screamed, called someone, torn the chart to pieces. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring down at the words printed in that same shaky handwriting I'd seen once before, etched into a bed rail years ago. Eleanor Mayhew, time of death, 6 a.m. 5:58. I backed away from the desk, clutching the chart against my chest, and stepped into the hallway. Every fluorescent light flickered once, in sequence, click, 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 like dominoes falling above my head. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, not sure where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in that room, couldn't be standing still. 5:59. I was halfway down the south wing when I felt it. A pressure building in my chest, like someone was slowly sitting on me. I stopped walking. My knees buckled. The chart slipped from my hands and scattered across the floor. And then it happened. A jolt ran through me like lightning. Not pain, something colder, something that hummed inside my bones. I gasped and dropped to one knee, clutching my ribs, blinking through blurred vision. My breath came in ragged gasps. And then everything just stopped. No more pain, no more noise. Silence. I was still kneeling on the tile, one hand pressed to the wall, the other flat against the floor. The lights above me were steady now. The air felt normal again. My chest ached, but it didn't feel fatal. My watch blinked. 6:01 a.m. I didn't die. Not then, anyway. By the time the day shift arrived, I was back behind the nurse's desk, hands shaking as I folded up the last page of that chart and stuffed it in my locker. No one asked what I was doing there. No one noticed I'd been crying. I smiled, signed off my shift, and left. I never went back. I submitted my final retirement papers that afternoon, packed up my locker the next day under the excuse of cleaning out early. I didn't tell anyone about the chart. I didn't tell them that room 13 did exist that night, if only for a few hours, that it had followed me through the halls, page by page, predicting things I hadn't yet lived through. It knew the symptoms before they happened, the pain before it came, my death before I felt the first hint of it. That was almost 20 years ago now. Mercy Hollow shut down not long after. The flood of '98 destroyed most of the lower level, and the board voted to close it permanently. The building's still standing, though. Last I heard, someone bought it cheap with dreams of turning it into apartments or maybe a wellness spa. Good luck with that. I've kept to myself since retiring. Moved out to a small cabin, quiet and far from anything with flickering lights or ghost stories etched into its drywall. I get the occasional letter from old co-workers. Most of them don't bring up the weird stuff. Some of them don't even remember it, or say they don't. But I remember. I remember everything. The man with my name on his tongue, the patient with ink for blood, the frost-covered woman with my heartbeat in her chest, the chart that tried to write the end of my story before I was ready. And lately, something strange has started happening again. It started with a dream. I was standing in Mercy Hollow's empty ER wing. Everything was just as I remembered it. The green linoleum floors, the pale walls, the coffee machine that rattled like it might explode. Only the clock on the wall had no hands. Just a blank white circle ticking loudly for no reason. In the dream, I walked to room 9, the one where they brought in John Doe all those years ago. The bed was empty, but the mattress was soaked, dark and rippling like water. When I stepped closer, the lights went out, and I heard it again. This time, not from the walls or the floors. It came from me, from inside my chest, echoing against my ribs. I felt it vibrating down my spine like a tuning fork. When I woke up, my heart was racing. My arms were numb. I told myself it was just a nightmare, just nerves, old age playing tricks on me. But then I found something I couldn't explain. It was early morning. I'd just made my coffee and was heading out to sit on the porch when I noticed the mailbox flag was up, which was odd. The mail doesn't come until noon, and I hadn't sent anything out. I opened the box and found a single piece of paper. No envelope, no postage, just a folded sheet of notebook paper, yellowed with age. I didn't want to open it, but I did. 7 words, written in that same uneven hand. You were late. It's not over. That was 3 days ago. I haven't slept since. I've kept that note on the kitchen table, folded once exactly how I found it. I've read it too many times. The words keep echoing in my mind. You were late. It's not over. I don't know what late means. I don't know what isn't over. I survived the hospital. I walked away. I made it through 4 impossible nights that should have broken me. But maybe that was the point. Maybe I was supposed to break. Maybe walking away wasn't survival. Maybe it was just delay. The old patterns have started creeping back in. 3 nights ago, I heard the knocking again, this time from the basement. I don't go down there much, but I knew it wasn't a mouse or the water heater. I stood at the top of the stairs with the flashlight clenched in my hand, trying to pretend the sound wasn't matching my heartbeat again. Pause. Exactly the rhythm of my pulse. I spent the night on the porch, wrapped in blankets, flashlight on, coffee burning in my gut. The sunrise was gray and slow, and I remember thinking, it followed me all the way out here. Then last night, it got closer. I was brushing my teeth. Same bathroom as always. Same tired face in the mirror. Only this time, the face didn't blink when I did. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. My reflection, my own reflection, was still smiling from the last time I'd laughed, a moment before. My real face had fallen into that tired frown I wear most days now. But the reflection, it held the smile like it wanted me to see it, like it wanted me to know I wasn't the only one looking anymore. I don't remember dropping the toothbrush, but I found it later, snapped clean in 2, lying on the bathroom rug. Today, I got a phone call. No number, no voice, just silence on the other end, but not empty silence. I heard it, ticking, not from a clock, not mechanical. It sounded more like a chart being flipped, a page turning slowly, over and over, paper on paper. I hung up and pulled every clock in the house off the wall, even the old one in the kitchen Russell used to wind by hand. I stuffed them in the closet and slammed the door. The ticking didn't stop, because it wasn't in the clocks. It was in me. I think I understand now. The man who said my name that night in 1995. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't even a person, not really. He was a placeholder, a warning, a beginning. And I think whatever came into that hospital with him wasn't meant to leave. But it did. It left with me. Maybe I absorbed it. Maybe I carried it out unknowingly like a nurse carrying disease on her shoes. I don't know. I've stopped trying to explain it in human terms. But I can feel it now. In the quiet. It's growing louder. Every beat of my heart feels borrowed. Every breath feels watched. And that thing, that awareness that's followed me from one horror to the next, is starting to take shape again. Not with claws, not with teeth, but with knowing. It knows me, my memories, my secrets, my regrets. It feeds off them, learns from them. And I think it wants to be me. That's the part I didn't understand before. I thought I was being haunted, cursed, punished. But that's not what this is. It's replacement. Each experience, John Doe, Hank, Mrs. Gable, the chart, they weren't random. They were rehearsals, attempts, blueprints for how to copy me from the inside out. And I think the chart was never just predicting my death. It was writing it. I found it again this morning. On the kitchen table beside the folded note was a fresh sheet of notebook paper. No envelope, no footprints, just waiting for me when I came down the stairs. At the top, in block letters, patient file number 13. Subject, Eleanor Mayhew. Status, transition phase, initiated. The rest was blank. I didn't touch it, didn't move it. I made my coffee and sat in my chair like always. But I didn't drink it. I just listened. And I heard it. Not in the walls this time. Inside the floorboards. Beneath my feet. Beneath me. It's almost ready. I can feel something pushing behind my eyes when I look in the mirror now. Something that wants me to smile when I'm not happy. Something that wants to answer the phone before it rings. Something that whispers my own name in the same voice I've used for 60 years. Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor. Not loud, never loud, but persistent. And tonight, just before I sat down to write this, I checked the mailbox again. Nothing inside, but scratched into the wood, right along the edge where I always reach to open it, were 3 letters. End. No punctuation, no explanation. I don't know what's going to happen to me, not exactly, but I don't think I'll be here tomorrow. I can feel it happening already. The heartbeat I used to call mine is no longer mine alone. The knocking doesn't wait for me to stop moving now. It follows me from room to room. It clicks in perfect time with the beeping of my pacemaker, but now it's faster, like it's setting the pace. And I don't dream anymore, at least not dreams that belong to me. So if you're reading this and you ever find yourself in a hospital like Mercy Hollow, if a patient you've never met knows your name, if a vial of blood turns black, if you hear a knock that matches your pulse, if your chart knows something you haven't told anyone, run, run, and don't ever go back, because it doesn't want to kill you. It wants to become you. And some doors, once opened, never shut again. Not really.